Neighbors laughed at his double cabin until the six-day blizzard shut down the city. Michael Stevens had become the laughingstock of the Pine Brook neighborhood. For 3 long years, neighbors watched with mockery as he single-handedly erected a strange structure in the backyard. 2 wooden cabins connected by a covered walkway, each with its own heating system and separate bedrooms. The truth behind that peculiar construction was a secret that gnawed at his chest every day. 3 years ago, his wife Jennifer had left, taking their 16-year-old daughter Sarah after a devastating argument about his life priorities. She had accused him of being a workaholic who never had time for the family. Michael promised to change, begged them to stay, but Jennifer had already made her decision. They left on a rainy March morning, leaving only a note. "When you figure out what really matters, we'll be waiting." Since then, Michael worked as an accountant at a small firm in the town of Aspen in the Rocky Mountains and dedicated all his free hours to building that double cabin. Every board he nailed was a silent promise that he had changed. Every brick he laid represented his hope that one day Jennifer and Sarah would come home. The first cabin would be for him, simple but cozy. The second, more elaborate, would be to welcome them when they decided to give the marriage another chance. The neighbors didn't understand. Mrs. Dorothy, the gossip from number 42, spread wild theories about the purpose of the construction. Some said Michael had gone crazy after the separation. Others whispered he was preparing a bunker for the end of the world. The kids on the street made up cruel nicknames. Two-House Uncle or Cabin Crazy. Michael's only constant companion was a ginger cat that had shown up in the yard right after Jennifer left. The animal, which he named Ginger, seemed to understand his loneliness. Every night, as Michael worked on the construction under the light of a kerosene lamp, Ginger would sit beside him, watching every move intently. The neighbors mocked that too, saying he talked to the cat as if it were a person. But Michael really did talk. He told Ginger about his plans, about how Jennifer had loved the idea of a mountain house when they were dating, about how Sarah had always asked for a room of her own where she could study in peace. The double cabin would be all of that, a renewed home, a second chance, concrete proof that he had learned to value what truly matters. The construction work had become a healthy obsession. Michael woke at 5 in the morning, worked at the office until 5 in the evening, and then dedicated 3 hours to the cabin before dinner. On weekends, he spent the entire day measuring, sawing, nailing, and painting. His muscles grew stronger, his hands calloused, but his heart remained broken by the absence of his family. During those 3 years, he tried sporadic contact with Jennifer through discreet messages. He never insisted, just sent photos of the construction's progress with simple captions, "For you," or "Thinking of home." Jennifer replied politely, but kept her distance. Sarah, who was now 19, had started college for psychology in Portland and seemed to be building her own independent life. The winter of 2024 arrived harsher than usual in the Rocky Mountains. Weather forecasts warned of an intense cold front coming from Canada, but no one expected the magnitude of what was to come. Michael had just installed the final heating system in the second cabin when the first flakes began to fall on a frigid Monday in July. The double cabin was finally ready. Every detail had been thoughtfully considered. Rustic furniture that Jennifer adored, a small library where Sarah could study, a centralized fireplace that would warm both spaces, and a well-stocked pantry for emergencies. Michael had a habit of stocking up on supplies, a trait the neighbors considered just another eccentricity. That Monday, as snow began to accumulate on the ground, Mrs. Dorothy knocked on the fence of Michael's backyard. "Mr. Michael, this construction of yours is almost turning into a resort," she said, with an ironic tone. "What's with so many rooms, so much stored food? Are you expecting a visit from the Pope?" Michael just smiled and continued adjusting the radio antenna on the main cabin. He had learned to ignore the comments, but deep down he felt a pang of sadness. If only they knew that all of it was out of love. "You'd better be careful with this snow," continued Mrs. Dorothy. "My husband said it could be serious this time." The neighbor had no idea how serious the situation would become. Michael had spent weeks studying weather forecasts and preparing the cabin for any eventuality. He had his own generator, firewood for 2 months, non-perishable food to feed a family for a long time, plus a complete first aid kit. All because he dreamed of the day when Jennifer and Sarah would arrive and find a truly safe home. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The snow continued to fall all Monday, transforming the Pinebrook neighborhood into a strangely beautiful landscape. The children went out to play, making snowmen and having snowball fights, while the adults watched with concern the growing accumulation on the roofs. Michael finished checking all the cabin's systems and prepared for a quiet night, reading a book about relationships he had bought in the hope of better understanding his own mistakes. On Tuesday, the situation changed drastically. The snow didn't stop for a minute, and the wind increased in intensity. The trees began to bend under the weight of the ice, and some older houses started having problems with their power supply. Michael watched from the cabin window as his neighbors struggled to clear their cars and keep the sidewalks unobstructed. Around noon on Tuesday, the first emergency occurred. The Wilson family, who lived in the blue house on the corner, knocked desperately on Michael's door. Mr. David Wilson had slipped on the ice and seriously injured his ankle, and they couldn't drive him to the hospital due to the snow piled up on the streets. "Mr. Michael, do you have any pain medication?" asked Mrs. Linda Wilson, visibly worried. "And by any chance, do you have a working phone? Ours has no dial tone." Michael immediately brought anti-inflammatories from his first aid kit and offered the satellite phone he had installed in the cabin. It was expensive equipment, but he considered it essential for emergencies. While Mrs. Linda spoke with the firefighters, Michael prepared an improvised stretcher and helped carry Mr. David to the cabin, where it would be warmer and more comfortable to wait for rescue. "My God, Michael," said Mr. David, impressed with the interior of the cabin. "This is better than many hotels. What organization?" Michael felt a mix of pride and melancholy. All that preparation was for Jennifer and Sarah, but at least it was serving to help people in need. He offered hot tea and blankets while they waited for the rescue, which took 3 hours to arrive due to road conditions. During this wait, other neighbors began to appear. The power had failed in half the houses on the street, and many families were suffering from the cold. Michael found himself in a delicate situation. His cabin had the capacity and supplies to take people in, but revealing that would mean exposing the true reason for its construction. The first to ask directly was Mrs. Dorothy, the same one who always mocked his eccentricities. "Michael, my house is as cold as a freezer," she said, without her usual ironic tone. Do you think you could fit a few more people in there? I promise we won't be a bother." Michael's heart tightened. This was exactly the type of situation he had prepared for, but not for the reasons he had imagined. Even so, he couldn't deny help to people in need. He opened the second cabin, revealing a fully equipped and cozy space that left everyone speechless. "Good Lord," murmured Mrs. Dorothy, observing the careful decorative details. "Michael, this is a dream. Who did you make all this for?" Michael hesitated, feeling all the pent-up emotions of the last 3 years rising to the surface. Ginger appeared and wound around his legs, as she always did when she sensed his sadness. "For my family," he replied simply, without elaborating. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of more neighbors seeking shelter. The Anderson family, with 3 small children, arrived shivering from the cold after their home's heating failed overnight. Michael didn't hesitate to open the doors and organize spaces for everyone. As the afternoon progressed, the double cabin transformed into a true shelter center. Michael demonstrated natural organizational skills, creating shifts for kitchen use, distributing blankets and keeping everyone fed and warm. His helpful nature and preparedness for emergencies impressed even those who had always considered him strange. "Michael, where did you learn to organize like this?" asked Mrs. Linda, while helping to prepare the communal dinner. "I learned from my mistakes," he replied, looking out the snow-covered window. "Sometimes we lose the most important people because we don't know how to take care of them properly." Wednesday brought an even more intense blizzard. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow on the ground reached knee-height. All roads leading to the neighborhood were blocked, and there was no estimate of when the plows could reach them. The small group in Michael's double cabin had become a survival community. During the shared breakfast, Michael turned on the radio to hear the news. The announcer reported that the blizzard was the worst in 50 years for the region and that several towns were completely cut off. People were advised to stay in safe, heated places and avoid unnecessary travel. Then came the news that would change everything. The satellite phone rang, and Michael answered, expecting information about rescue or road clearing. On the other line, a familiar voice made his heart race. "Michael, is that really you?" It was Jennifer, and her voice sounded worried and anxious. "Jennifer, where are you?" Michael stepped out of the cabin for privacy, but his hands were trembling from emotion as much as from the cold. "We're in Portland, but Sarah is sick. Pneumonia. The apartment we're in lost heat yesterday, and she urgently needs a warm, dry place to recover. I tried to call last night, but I couldn't get through." Michael felt the world spin. His daughter was sick and needed him, but now the cabin was full of neighbors in need. How would he explain the situation without revealing that all this preparation had been intended exactly for this kind of moment with his family? "Michael, I know I don't have the right to ask this after so long," continued Jennifer, her voice choked, "but could you take us in, just until she gets better?" "Of course," replied Michael immediately, without hesitation. "Come here. I'll find a way to get you." "All the roads are blocked, Michael. Civil defense said it could take days to clear." Michael looked around, seeing the snow that continued to fall relentlessly. He had a Jeep prepared for extreme situations, with special tires and chains. But the trip to Portland under normal conditions already took 2 hours. In this blizzard, it would be extremely dangerous. "I'll figure it out," he said with determination. "Stay where you are and give me the exact address. I'll come get you." After hanging up, Michael stood in the snow for a few minutes, processing the situation. His daughter was sick and needed him. This was the moment he had waited for 3 years, but now he needed to make a difficult decision. How to reconcile rescuing his family with the responsibility for the neighbors who had sought refuge in his cabin. When he went back inside, the atmosphere was cheerful with conversation and laughter. The children played together, the adults shared stories, and everyone seemed to have temporarily forgotten the problems outside. Michael watched the scene and felt a pang of guilt for thinking of leaving them to get his family. Mrs. Dorothy approached him. "Michael, are you okay? You look worried." "I got a call," he said, still processing how to approach the situation. My daughter is sick and needs a warm place to recover." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone looked at Michael, finally understanding that the double cabin hadn't been built out of eccentricity, but out of paternal love and hope for family reconciliation. "The second cabin," murmured Mr. David, still resting with his injured ankle. "It was for them, wasn't it?" Michael nodded, feeling the emotions overflow. "My ex-wife and my daughter. I've been waiting 3 years for them to come home." The revelation created a moment of general awkwardness. Everyone there had mocked Michael at some point, not understanding that behind his apparent eccentricities was a man fighting to win back his family through concrete gestures of change and preparation. Mrs. Linda stood up and put her hand on Michael's shoulder. "And now your daughter needs to come here? She has pneumonia. She needs a warm, dry place to recover, but they're in Portland and all the roads are blocked." The 8-year-old son of the Anderson family, who had spent the morning playing with Ginger, approached innocently. "Uncle Michael, are you going to get the aunt and cousin you talk about so much?" Michael blushed intensely, realizing that during the days together he had mentioned Jennifer and Sarah more times than he imagined. His emotional vulnerability was exposed to everyone who had always considered him a strange and reserved neighbor. "He talks about them?" asked Mrs. Dorothy with genuine curiosity. "Uncle Michael always tells stories about Aunt Jennifer and Cousin Sarah," the child continued innocently. "He said Auntie likes hot chocolate with cinnamon and that Cousin wants to be a psychologist when she grows up." Michael's embarrassment was visible, but the neighbor's reaction surprised him. Instead of more mockery, he found understanding and solidarity. Mrs. Linda quickly organized an impromptu meeting to discuss the situation. "Michael, you need to go get your family," she said firmly. "We'll manage here while you're gone. But I can't leave you alone in a situation like this." "Of course you can," interjected Mr. David. "We spent our whole lives mocking you without knowing you were building all this thinking of your family. It's our turn to return the favor." The discussion that followed was emotional. Each family offered to help in some way. Some would take care of maintaining the fireplaces, others would organize the food, and everyone committed to keeping the cabin in order until Michael returned with Jennifer and Sarah. Mrs. Dorothy, the gossip who had ridiculed Michael the most over the years, approached him with tears in her eyes. "Michael, I need to ask for your forgiveness. I spent years speaking ill of you, inventing crazy theories about that cabin, and you were just trying to bring your family back home. There's no need to apologize, Mrs. Dorothy." "Yes, there is, and more than that. When you bring your wife and daughter, I want to be the first to welcome them properly to this neighborhood. They will feel at home here, I promise." Michael was moved by his neighbor's sincerity. After 3 years of loneliness and mockery, he finally felt he belonged to that community. But there was no time for sentimentality. Sarah was sick and needed urgent help. He prepared his Jeep with safety equipment, snow chains, extra flashlights, basic medications, and blankets. The trip to Portland would be dangerous, but Michael had prepared for emergencies for years. Ginger insisted on going with him, as if understanding the importance of the mission. "Take care of my home," Michael said before leaving. "When I return with my family, you will be the first guests at a welcome party." The journey began late Wednesday afternoon and was one of the most challenging experiences of Michael's life. The roads were practically impassable, with accumulated snow and ice everywhere. Several times he had to stop to put on or adjust the chains, and in some sections he had to clear the way manually with a shovel. Ginger behaved like an exemplary co-pilot, alert to any change in the Jeep's behavior or road conditions. Michael talked to the cat throughout the trip, as he always did in tense moments. "Everything will be all right, Ginger," he said, while carefully maneuvering through especially dangerous stretches. "After 3 years, we're finally bringing our family home." The trip, which normally took 2 hours, stretched to almost 6. Michael arrived at Jennifer's apartment around 10 at night, exhausted but determined. When Jennifer opened the door, the two looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. She was thinner, with shorter hair, but her eyes still had the same sparkle Michael had fallen in love with 25 years ago. "You really came," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I said I'd find a way." Sarah appeared behind her mother, visibly weakened by pneumonia, but with a shy smile on her face. She had grown a lot in the last 3 years, turning into a beautiful and determined young woman, with features that resembled both her father and mother. "Hi, Dad," she said simply. Michael hugged his daughter carefully, feeling how thin and still weak from the illness she was. "How are you, my love?" "Better now that you're here." The return trip was slower and more careful, with Sarah sleeping in the back seat covered by several blankets, Jennifer in the passenger seat talking softly with Michael about the last 3 years, and Ginger keeping watch over the reunited family. "Michael, is the cabin really finished?" Jennifer asked during a calmer stretch of road. "It is. Every detail you suggested in that conversation about our dream home, remember? The central fireplace, the library, the well-organized pantry, it's all there." Jennifer was silent for a few minutes. "You really have changed, haven't you? I had 3 years to think about our mistakes. My mistakes, mostly. It wasn't just you, Michael. I was wrong too for leaving like that without giving you time to show you could change." When they arrived back at the Pine Brook neighborhood, it was already early Thursday morning. The blizzard had eased somewhat, but the snow continued to fall. The lights of the double cabin shone warmly in the white landscape, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. The neighbors had organized shifts to await Michael's return. Mrs. Linda was the first to come out to greet them, followed by the entire small community that had formed at the cabin. "Welcome," said Mrs. Dorothy, approaching Jennifer and Sarah with genuine joy. "Cow have no idea how much we've talked about you these past few days." Sarah was carefully settled into the second cabin, which had been prepared especially for her recovery. The neighbors had warmed the space, prepared medicinal herbal tea, and set up a cozy corner where she could rest properly. "My God, Michael," whispered Jennifer, observing all the details of the cabin. "It's exactly as we dreamed when we were young." Every detail was planned with what you liked in mind. Thursday dawned with the snow still falling, but less intensely, Sarah woke up visibly better, with more color in her face and steadier breathing. The constant warmth of the cabin and the basic medical care Michael had arranged were taking effect. During the collective breakfast, the two families, Michael's original one and the temporary one formed by the neighbors, blended naturally. Jennifer integrated into the household activities. Sarah played with the Anderson children, and everyone seemed to have forgotten this was an emergency situation. "Dad," said Sarah during a break in the play, "why did you never tell us about your neighbors? They're amazing." Michael looked around, seeing people he had for years considered critics and enemies, now transformed into friends and supporters. "I guess I never gave them a real chance to get to know them." "And we never gave you a real chance to get to know you," admitted David. "We judged you by appearances, without understanding what kind of person you really were." Thursday afternoon brought a new revelation when Mrs. Dorothy pulled Jennifer aside for a private conversation. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something about your husband," said the neighbor as they prepared lunch together. "Ex-husband," Jennifer corrected automatically. "I'm not so sure about ex, dear. You need to know that these 3 years, Michael worked on this cabin every day thinking of you. He talked to the cat about you, planned every detail imagining how you would feel, saved every penny to buy the furniture he thought you'd like." Jennifer stopped stirring the pot and looked at Mrs. Dorothy. "He stayed up nights studying books about relationships, about how to be a better father, about how to better manage time between work and family. We thought he'd gone crazy, but really he was learning to be the man you deserved." "How do you know all this?" "Because I spent 3 years watching and judging without understanding. Now, seeing you together, seeing how Sarah looks at her father, seeing how he looks at you, I understood that I witnessed one of the most beautiful demonstrations of love I've ever seen in my life." Jennifer felt tears in her eyes. During the 3 years of separation, she had observed Michael from a distance through mutual acquaintances and social media, noticing subtle changes in his behavior and priorities. The construction of the double cabin had been the definitive proof that he had really changed, but hearing the testimony of someone who had watched him daily was different. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. Friday arrived with a surprise. The snow had finally stopped falling, but the accumulation was so great that the plows still hadn't managed to reach the neighborhood. The group in the double cabin had become a true temporary family, with established routines and shared responsibilities. That morning, Michael found Sarah reading a book about psychology in the small library he had set up specifically with her in mind. "You really put this together for me?" she asked, flipping through the carefully selected books. "Each book was chosen with your interests in mind. Even from a distance, I kept up with your studies and tried to imagine what you'd like to read." Sarah closed the book and looked at her father seriously. "Dad, I need to tell you something. In these 3 years, even living far away, I always knew you were trying to change. Mom would show me the pictures you sent of the construction, and I could see how much care you put into every detail. Why did you never reply to the messages?" "Because Mom was afraid of giving false hope. She wanted to be sure the change was real before coming back, and I was afraid of being disappointed again." Michael felt a pain in his chest as he realized how much suffering he had caused his family because of his old, twisted priorities. "Sarah, I know I can't change the past, but I can promise you I've learned my lesson. Family is more important than anything else." "I know, Dad. Seeing you open your home to all these neighbors, organizing everything so everyone would be okay, even risking yourself to come get us, that showed me who you really are now." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Linder with worrying news. Her husband, who had gone out in the morning to check on the situation at the other houses in the neighborhood, had found the Thompson family, an elderly couple who lived isolated at the end of the street, suffering from the cold and without adequate food. "Michael, they're too proud to ask for help," explained Mrs. Linder, "but Mr. Anthony has a terrible cough and Mrs. Mary is very weak. Do you think you could—" "Of course," Michael replied immediately. "Let's go get them now." Jennifer offered to accompany him on the rescue mission, leaving Sarah in the care of the other neighbors. The couple walked through the deep snow to the Thompsons' house, an old and poorly insulated structure where they had lived for 40 years. They found Mr. Anthony, 72, and Mrs. Mary, 68, huddled by an old electric heater that barely worked. The couple had spent 2 days eating only crackers and cold tea, without the courage to bother the neighbors. "Mr. Anthony, Mrs. Mary, you're coming with us to the cabin," Michael said firmly. "I won't take no for an answer." "We don't want to be a bother, Michael," murmured Mrs. Mary in a weak voice. "The only thing that would bother me is knowing you're in need when I'm in a position to help," he replied, already helping the couple gather some clothes. Jennifer watched, impressed, as Michael handled the situation with natural ease and compassion. The man she had left 3 years ago for being selfish and focused only on work had transformed into someone genuinely concerned with the well-being of others. Back at the double cabin, Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Mary were welcomed warmly by the other refugees. Michael organized a special space for the elderly couple near the main fireplace and arranged for basic medical care for Mr. Anthony's persistent cough. During the shared lunch, Mrs. Mary pulled Jennifer aside. "Dear, I knew your husband when you were newlyweds," said the elderly woman. "He was always a good man, but he was lost in the responsibilities of adult life. Now I see he found his way." "What do you mean, Mrs. Mary?" "A man who builds a house thinking of every detail for his family's comfort, who stocks supplies for emergencies, who opens his doors to neighbors in need, that's a man who has learned what truly matters in life." Jennifer looked through the window and saw Michael playing in the snow with the Anderson children and Sarah. Ginger ran around the group, meowing happily. It was a scene of genuine happiness she hadn't seen in years. "You still love him, don't you?" asked Mrs. Mary gently. "I never stopped loving him," admitted Jennifer. "I just lost hope that we could be happy together." "And now?" Jennifer smiled, watching Michael help Sarah build a snowman. "Now I'm starting to believe that maybe he built more than a double cabin. Maybe he built a second chance for our family." Friday afternoon brought a special activity suggested by David. Since they were all gathered in a unique situation, why not take the opportunity to get to know each other's stories better? What began as a casual conversation turned into a session of confessions and revelations that brought the group even closer. Mrs. Dorothy was the first to open up. "You all think I'm just a nosy gossip, but the truth is I was watching other people's lives because I was running from the problems in my own. My marriage has been in crisis for 2 years, and I didn't know how to deal with it." David followed her lead. "And I was jealous of Michael. Seeing him fight to win back his family, I realized I was neglecting my own. My children are adults now, but we hardly talk anymore." One by one, people shared their vulnerabilities and fears. The blizzard had created an environment of forced intimacy that broke down normal social barriers, allowing neighbors who barely greeted each other to discover common ground and form genuine bonds. Michael was the last to speak. "For 3 years, I thought I was building a house for my family. Only now do I realize I was building something bigger, a lesson about what truly matters in life. It's not the walls that make a home, it's the people we choose to share our lives with." Sarah stood up and hugged her father. "Dad, I want you to know I've forgiven all the mistakes of the past. The man you are today is the father I always wanted to have." Jennifer approached and, for the first time in 3 years, kissed Michael lightly on the cheek. "And I want you to know I'm ready for us to try again." The moment was so moving that even Ginger seemed to understand, positioning herself in the center of the group as if wanting to hug everyone at once. Saturday dawned with a clear sky and bright sun, creating a stunning contrast with the snow-covered landscape. In the distance, they could hear the noise of the snowplows approaching. The 6-day blizzard was coming to an end, but no one in the group seemed anxious to leave. During breakfast, Michael made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been thinking about everything that happened this week," he said, looking at each person present. "I built this double cabin thinking of sheltering my family, but I discovered that family is much more than blood ties. You have all become my family too." Jennifer smiled, knowing where Michael was going with this. "That's why I want to propose something. How about we turn this double cabin into a neighborhood support center? A place where people in trouble can find help and temporary shelter. The proposal was met with enthusiasm by all. Each family offered to contribute in some way. Mrs. Dorothy knew people who could donate furniture and clothes. Mr. David had connections with food suppliers. Mrs. Linda had experience in administration and could help organize the center's operations. "And us?" asked Sarah. "Where will our family live?" "In the first cabin," replied Michael, looking affectionately at Jennifer. "If your mother agrees to come back home." "I agree," said Jennifer without hesitation, "but on one condition, that we continue to welcome our extended family whenever they need it." The rest of Saturday was dedicated to planning the future community center and celebrating the family reunion. The children played in the snow, the adults shared plans and dreams, and everyone helped prepare a special feast to mark the end of the blizzard and the beginning of a new phase for the whole community. When the snowplows finally arrived in the late afternoon and the roads were cleared, no one rushed to leave. The group had become a true family, and parting would be difficult for everyone. Mrs. Dorothy was the first to speak about leaving. "Michael, Jennifer, Sarah, you know our home will always have its doors open for you, right?" "And ours for you," replied Jennifer. "In fact, consider yourselves officially invited to come back here every weekend. Let's make it a tradition." The goodbyes were emotional, with long hugs, phone number exchanges, and promises to keep in regular contact. Each family took with them not only memories of a unique experience, but also a new understanding of the value of community and solidarity. Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Mary were the last to leave, insisting on leaving a small donation to help Michael keep the community center running. "Michael, in 40 years living in this neighborhood, I've never seen such unity," said Mr. Anthony with emotion. "You didn't just build a house, you built a community." When they were finally alone, Michael, Jennifer, Sarah, and Ginger, the double cabin felt strangely quiet after a week full of voices and movement. But it was a comfortable silence of a family reunited in their own home. "Dad," said Sarah as they prepared for their first night together in 3 years, "can I ask a question?" "Of course, sweetheart." "During all those years building the cabin, did you really believe you could bring us back?" Michael looked at Jennifer, who was also waiting for the answer with curiosity. "There were moments of doubt," he admitted honestly, "especially when the neighbors mocked me or when you didn't respond to the messages. But every time I thought about giving up, I looked at Ginger and remembered that some of life's best gifts come when we least expect them." "How so?" asked Jennifer. "Ginger showed up in my backyard the day you left. I was devastated, not knowing what to do with my life, and suddenly this ginger cat was looking at me as if to say, 'Don't give up.' Taking care of him taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a daily choice to care for someone." Ginger, as if understanding they were talking about him, approached and curled around Michael's legs, purring contentedly. "And now?" asked Jennifer. "What are we going to do starting tomorrow?" "Now we're going to learn to be a family again," said Michael. "But this time I'll do it differently. No more working late, no more canceling family commitments, no more prioritizing the wrong things." "And I'll learn to trust more," said Jennifer, "and to communicate my fears and needs better instead of just leaving when things get tough." Sarah hugged her parents. "And I'll learn to value this second chance that life is giving us." The first week after the blizzard was one of adaptation and rediscovery. Michael requested to work from home 2 days a week. Jennifer moved permanently into the cabin with all her things, and Sarah decided to finish her psychology degree by studying partially online to spend more time with family. The transformation of the second cabin into a community center began immediately. Mrs. Dorothy became the volunteer coordinator of the project, Mrs. Linda organized a donation system, and Mr. David secured partnerships with local merchants to keep the stock of supplies always replenished. The first family to use the support center arrived 2 weeks after the blizzard, a young couple with a baby who had lost their home in a fire. Michael, Jennifer, and Sarah welcomed them as if they were relatives, offering not only temporary shelter, but also emotional support and practical help to rebuild their lives. "It's incredible how our lives have changed," Jennifer commented one night while organizing donations in the second cabin. 3 months ago, I never imagined we'd be together again. And I never imagined a blizzard could be the best thing that ever happened to me," Michael replied. Sarah, who was sorting baby clothes for the hosted family, smiled. You know what I find most amazing? How suffering can turn into something beautiful when people come together. Their daughter's statement made Michael reflect on the entire journey. 3 years of loneliness and hard work had been necessary for him to understand his priorities and prepare to be the man his family deserved. The blizzard had been the catalyst that transformed years of quiet preparation into a real opportunity for change. 6 months after the blizzard, the double cabin had become a symbol of solidarity in the town of Aspen. The community center had helped dozens of families in temporary hardship, and the story of Michael's transformation spread throughout the region, inspiring other couples to fight for their relationships. Mrs. Dorothy organized a party to celebrate the center's 6 months of operation. The entire neighborhood was present, along with many of the families who had been helped by the project. The Pine Brook neighborhood had become an example of a united and supportive community. During the party, Michael stepped onto a small makeshift platform to give a speech. A year ago, if someone had told me I would be here, surrounded by people I consider family, celebrating a community project born from my double cabin, I wouldn't have believed it, he began, looking at Jennifer and Sarah in the front row. I've learned that building a house is easy. The hard part is building a home. And a home isn't built alone. It's built with love, patience, forgiveness, and a lot of persistence. The audience applauded, and Michael felt his eyes well up with emotion. I especially want to thank the 6-day blizzard that stopped our town. It taught me that sometimes we need a storm to discover who we really are and what truly matters. Jennifer stood up and joined Michael on the platform, and I want to thank a stubborn man who didn't give up on his family, even when his family seemed to have given up on him. Sarah also stepped up, and I want to thank all the neighbors who taught me that family is much bigger than we imagine. Finally, Mrs. Dorothy took the microphone, and I want to publicly apologize to Michael for all the years of mockery and gossip. You taught us that we should observe more and judge less. The party continued late into the night, with music, dancing, and many stories shared. Ginger circulated among the guests as the official host, receiving affection from children and adults who already considered him the official mascot of the community center. A full year had passed since the blizzard when special news arrived. Sarah was engaged to a college classmate, a young psychologist she had met during her volunteer work at the community center. The wedding would be held right in the backyard of the double cabin, in a ceremony that would bring together the entire community that had formed. Dad, would you walk me down the aisle? Sarah asked during the wedding planning. It would be the honor of my life, replied Michael, moved. And Mom, would you be my matron of honor? Jennifer hugged her daughter with tears of happiness. Of course, my love. Sarah's wedding became a celebration not only of young love, but of the entire journey of reconciliation and growth the family had undergone. The groom, a kind young man named Daniel, had fallen in love not only with Sarah, but with the whole story of the double cabin and the community center. During the ceremony, held in a decorated garden in the backyard where once there had only been a lonely structure, Michael looked around and saw the whole path he had traveled. The same neighbors who had mocked his double cabin were now there celebrating his daughter's happiness with sincere joy. In his speech at the reception, Michael spoke about persistence, forgiveness, and second chances. 5 years ago, I was a lost man who had forgotten what truly matters. Today, I am the father of a beautiful bride, the husband of an extraordinary woman, and part of a community that taught me the true meaning of family. Daniel, the groom, asked to speak as well. I fell in love with Sarah, but I also fell in love with this family and this community. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling, but a set of daily actions chosen consciously. The celebration continued until dawn, with plenty of music, dancing, and joy. When the last guests finally left and the family retreated to the main cabin, Michael realized he had achieved something he didn't even know was possible. A complete life, surrounded by people he loved and who loved him back. Jennifer, he said, as they prepared for bed after the long celebration, do you have any regrets about our decision to get back together? None, she replied without hesitation. In fact, I feel our separation was necessary so we could find each other again as better people. And now what do you see for our future? Jennifer smiled and pointed out the window, where Ginger was lying in the garden lit by the full moon. "I see more years building our community, watching Sarah raise her own children in this special place, welcoming people in need into our second cabin, and growing old with you as we take care of each other." "Sounds perfect." "It's more than perfect, Michael. It's real." 2 years after Sarah's wedding, life in the double cabin had found a peaceful and happy rhythm. The community center operated efficiently, serving an average of 3 families per month in temporary need. Michael had become a kind of informal community counselor, helping couples in crisis and offering guidance to parents struggling to balance work and family. Jennifer developed a side project of a community garden on the back of the property, where families staying at the center could learn basic farming techniques and take seedlings to plant at their own homes. The project became so successful that the Aspen City Council adopted it as a model for other neighborhoods. Sarah and Daniel, now both psychology graduates, opened a joint practice specializing in family and community therapy, offering free sessions for low-income families once a week in the second cabin. Their work perfectly complemented the practical support offered by the community center. The news that would change everything arrived on a spring morning when Sarah appeared at the main cabin with a radiant smile and an ultrasound in her hands. "Grandpa Michael, Grandma Jennifer," she said playfully, "are you ready to meet Ginger's first great-grandchild?" The pregnancy announcement sparked an explosion of joy in the family. Michael cried openly upon realizing he would be a grandfather, and Jennifer immediately began planning how to adapt the cabin to welcome the first baby of the new generation. "A child growing up in this place," murmured Michael, looking at the backyard where he had built not just a house, but an entire community. "A child who will never know what life was like before we learned the value of family and solidarity." Ginger, now with a few gray hairs in his red coat, seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He approached Sarah and gently placed his paw on her belly, as if wanting to greet the arriving baby. "He's going to be your child's protective cat," said Jennifer, petting Ginger, "just as he was our guardian angel all these years." Sarah's pregnancy months were lived intensely by the entire double cabin community. Mrs. Dorothy organized a collective baby shower. Mrs. Linda knitted little clothes. Mr. David built a handmade crib, and Mrs. Mary shared recipes for homemade baby food she had used with her own children decades ago. The community center gained a new purpose during this time, supporting families with newborn babies. Jennifer organized support groups for first-time mothers, and several women from the community volunteered to share knowledge about childcare. When the baby was finally born, a beautiful boy named Ethan, in honor of the first baby who had been hosted at the community center years before, the entire neighborhood mobilized to celebrate the arrival. Michael held his grandson for the first time on a sunny summer afternoon, with Ginger watching attentively at his feet. "Ethan," he whispered to the sleeping baby, "you will grow up in a place where you learn that family isn't just blood, but choice. Where you discovered that building walls is easy, but building relationships requires daily work. Where you understood that sometimes we need a storm to find our true home." Jennifer approached and put her arm around her husband. "And where you learned that it's never too late for a second chance." Sarah and Daniel watched the scene from the porch of the main cabin, knowing their son was growing up in the safest and most loving place they could imagine. "Daniel," Sarah said softly, "do you believe it all started with a double cabin the neighbors thought was weird?" "I believe it all started long before that," he replied. "It started when your father decided it was worth fighting for family, even without a guarantee it would work out." The afternoon stretched on with baby Ethan being passed from lap to lap by all the uncles and aunts of the double cabin community. Every person present had contributed in some way to creating the loving and safe environment where that child would grow up. As the sun began to set, gilding the landscape that had been covered in snow during that transformative week years ago, Michael reflected silently on the entire journey. It had begun as a lonely man building a cabin out of desperation and unrequited love. He had become a respected member of a close-knit community, a dedicated husband in a renewed marriage, a present father to a daughter who had forgiven him, and now a grandfather who would have the chance to show from the start how to be a constant and loving presence in a child's life. The double cabin, which began as a symbol of his failures as a husband and father, had transformed into the heart of a community where entire families found support, love, and second chances. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 5 years had passed since Ethan's birth when the family received an unexpected visitor. It was a fall afternoon when an unfamiliar car stopped in front of the double cabin. Out stepped an elegantly dressed man, accompanied by a crew with cameras and microphones. "Mr. Michael Stevens?" asked the man, approaching. "My name is James Patterson. I'm a journalist with American Family Magazine. We'd like to do a feature story about your community center and the history of the double cabin." Michael was surprised. In recent years, he had received a few visits from social workers and representatives of non-governmental organizations interested in the project, but never a national press crew. "How did you hear about our story?" asked Jennifer, joining the conversation. "Through one of the couples you helped 2 years ago," explained the journalist. "Brian and Amanda, who stayed here when they lost their jobs. They moved to New York, rebuilt their lives, and now Brian works in our newsroom. When he told your story, we decided it needed to be known across the country." The story was filmed over 3 days, showing not just the physical structure of the double cabin and the community center, but especially the stories of the people who had been impacted by the project. Mrs. Dorothy was interviewed about her transformation from the neighborhood gossip to community coordinator. David Wilson spoke about how watching Michael's struggle to win back his family inspired him to improve his own relationship with his children. The special feature made the magazine's cover and generated unexpected national attention. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Jennifer received calls from people across the United States interested in replicating the double cabin model in their own communities. "Michael," Jennifer said one night after answering the 10th call of the day, "do you realize our little local story has become a national movement?" "It's frightening and exciting at the same time," he replied. "I never imagined that building a house for my family would result in all this." Ethan, now 5 years old and full of energy, interrupted his grandparents' conversation. "Grandpa, what's a national movement?" Michael bent down to his grandson's level. "It's when a good idea spreads to help many people in different places. Like when you taught Uncle David how to make the little birdhouse, and now everyone in the neighborhood has one." "Exactly like that, champ." The child's innocent analogy made Michael smile. Indeed, his story had become a sort of recipe that other families were adapting to their own realities, not necessarily building double cabins, but creating community spaces and projects based on the model of mutual aid and solidarity that had arisen naturally in the Pine Brook neighborhood. The increased visibility also brought new responsibilities. Michael was invited to lecture at universities about community psychology. Jennifer became a consultant for urban gardening projects, and the community center began receiving social work interns from various colleges in the region. Sarah and Daniel expanded their family psychology practice and began counseling couples from other cities who came specifically seeking the couple who saved the marriage in the double cabin, as the press had nicknamed Michael and Jennifer. "Sometimes I feel like we're living in a fairy tale," commented Sarah during a Sunday family lunch. "Who could have imagined that a 6-day blizzard would change so much?" "Life has these ironies," replied Daniel. "What seemed like the biggest tragedy turned into the greatest blessing." Ginger, now 10 years old and noticeably slower in his movements, remained the official mascot of all activities. Ethan had grown up with him and developed a special connection that recalled the relationship between Michael and the cat during the lonely construction years. "Grandpa," asked Ethan one afternoon while they played in the backyard, "why did you talk to Ginger before we arrived?" Michael stopped pushing the swing he had built especially for his grandson. "How do you know I talked to him?" "Grandma Dorothy told me. She said you talked to him about us." Michael looked at Ginger, who was resting in the shade of a tree. "Because sometimes, when we're alone and sad, we need to talk to someone who will listen without judging." "And did Ginger listen?" "Yes, he did. And somehow he gave me the strength to carry on." Ethan ran to Ginger and sat beside him. "Thank you for taking care of my grandpa, Ginger," he said seriously, petting the cat gently. Ginger purred and stretched, as if he perfectly understood the child's gratitude. It was a simple moment, but deeply symbolic of how wisdom and love can be passed between generations. At the end of that year, Michael marked 10 years since the start of the double cabin's construction. The date did not go unnoticed by the community, which organized a special celebration to mark the decade of transformations. During the party, which brought together not only the local neighborhood but also many of the families that had been helped by the community center over the years, Michael was surprised with a moving tribute. Mrs. Dorothy, now 72 but still as energetic as ever, climbed onto the small stage set up in the backyard. 10 years ago, I was a bitter woman who spent my time judging and criticizing others, she began. Michael Stevens taught me that it is far more rewarding to build than to destroy, to welcome than to push away, to understand than to condemn. One by one, the people who had been impacted by the double cabin stood up to share their testimonies. There were stories of marriages saved, families reunited, children who grew up in a more supportive community, elderly people who found purpose in helping others. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he was visibly moved. 10 years ago, I started building a house because I was desperate to bring my family back, he said, looking at Jennifer, Sarah, Daniel, and Ethan in the front row. Today, I realize I built much more than a house. I built a new version of myself. The audience applauded, but Michael asked for silence to continue. But the most important thing I learned is that no transformation happens alone. Every person here contributed to making me the man I am today. Every family that passed through our center taught me something about generosity. Every neighbor who supported me showed me the value of community. Ethan stood up and ran to the stage, climbing onto his grandfather's lap. "Grandpa, can I talk too?" "Of course, champ." Ethan took the microphone with his small hands. "I want to thank everyone for making my house the best place in the world." The child's simplicity and sincerity brought tears and smiles to everyone present. For Ethan, that united and loving community was simply his normal reality. He did not know a world where neighbors didn't help each other, where families didn't support one another, where a double cabin wasn't synonymous with welcome and second chances. The party continued late into the night, but the most special moment happened after everyone else had left. Michael, Jennifer, Sarah, Daniel, and Ethan sat on the porch of the main cabin, watching the lights from the second cabin, where a new family was recovering from a fire that had destroyed their home the week before. "Dad," said Sarah, "do you have any regrets about these 10 years?" Michael thought for a moment. "Just one. It took me so long to learn that building relationships is more important than building walls." "But if you had learned sooner, maybe our story would be different," observed Daniel. "Maybe we wouldn't have gone through the separation, the blizzard, the reunion, and maybe we wouldn't have become the family we are today." "He's right," agreed Jennifer. "Our separation was painful but necessary. It forced us to grow individually before we could grow together." Ethan, who was nearly asleep on Michael's lap, murmured, "Grandpa, are you going to build another house?" "Why do you ask that, champ?" "Because if you build one, more people will come live near us." The child's innocence made everyone laugh, but it also brought an interesting reflection. Indeed, the fame of the twin cabin had attracted several families to move to the Pinebrook neighborhood. What was once a quiet, isolated street had become a vibrant community, sought after by people who valued a sense of neighborhood and solidarity. "I don't need to build another house, Ethan," replied Michael. "What's important isn't having more houses, but having more open hearts." That night, as the family turned in to sleep, Michael took his usual evening walk through the yard, checking that everything was in order. It was a habit he had developed during the lonely years of construction, and one he kept to this day. Ginger accompanied him, slower than in the old days, but still a faithful companion. The two always stopped at the same spot, the exact point where Michael had driven the first stake for the twin cabin 10 years earlier. "Thank you, Ginger," Michael said softly, petting the cat, "for all these years of companionship, for giving me strength when I was alone, for being part of our family." Ginger purred and rubbed against Michael's legs, just as he had done for 10 years. It was a simple ritual, but one that connected the present to the past. reminding Michael of the entire journey he had traveled and all the people who had made his transformation possible. From Ethan's room came the soft sound of the child whispering to his toys before sleep. From the main bedroom came the voices of Sarah and Daniel planning the future of their young family. From the room where he and Jennifer had slept for 6 years came the sound of her organizing some papers from the community center. They were the sounds of a living house, of a functioning family, of a true home. Michael had finally achieved everything he had dreamed of when he began building that twin cabin. A place where his family felt at home, an environment where love was shown through daily actions, a space where each person felt valued and cared for. More than that, he had created something he never imagined possible, an entire community transformed by the power of example and persistence. His personal story of redemption had become a source of inspiration and hope for hundreds of other families. As he headed back to the cabin, Michael took one last look at the second building, where the hosted family was safe and warm. In a few weeks, they would leave to restart their lives, and a new family in need would occupy that space. It was a continuous cycle of help and renewal that had become the central purpose of Michael's life. "Good evening, my family," he whispered before entering, addressing both the people sleeping in the cabin and the entire community that had formed around it. It was the end of another day in a life that had become full, meaningful, and filled with love. A life that was born from the pain of separation, grew through the hard work of building, blossomed during a 6-day snowstorm, and multiplied into blessings for countless others. Michael Stevens's double cabin had become much more than a house. It was a living symbol that it's never too late for true change, that persistent love can overcome any obstacle, and that the best things in life are born when we put the right people at the center of our priorities. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of love, perseverance, and transformation? What was the moment that touched your heart the most? The lonely building of the cabin, the family reunion during the snowstorm, or perhaps the formation of this beautiful community? Tell us in the comments how this story stirred your feelings and if you've ever lived a similar experience of a second chance in love. Don't forget to leave your like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching narratives like this one. Your participation is very important to us.